All right, so we are here at Beverly Oasis Suites this morning, and we are continuing the discussion. And of course, again, for those of you who don't know and are just joining us for the first time, good morning and welcome. My name is Dwayne, and you are viewing us here on Youth Wednesdays at Tobago Updates Television. This morning, we wanted to begin the discourse relative to Labor Wars campaign in NUGFW, right? And this morning we have a campaign manager and lead consultant, Mr. Lance Ogiste. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning to Tobago. Good morning to the world.
Is it true that real men wear pink?
Men wear pink, real men wear pink, all men wear pink.
All right, all right, all right. So, tell us about yourself and what is your position and as campaign manager and lead consultant.
Right. So the National Union for Government and Federated Workers, they're having their internal elections. All 15 positions are being contested, and the Labor Warriors is one of the teams that are contesting this election. In the Tobago space or the Tobago sector, I happen to be the consultant and the campaign manager on behalf of the Labor Warriors, whose symbol is the shield and the two swords.
Why the shield and two swords?
Typically in our industrial relations space and where it pertains to the worker, we know historically it has been a fight, it has been a struggle, it is not without challenges as the worker representatives or trade union attempt to seek and secure benefits and entitlement for the worker. So the shield and the sword, the shield and the two swords, they are symbolic of these conventional tools or armed devices that is acquainted to war.
Yeah, I know you guys were here. One of the teams, I should say, was here sometime last week, just highlighting some of the intricacies of this internal election. But for those of our viewers who might have missed it, right? Can you kindly rehash what NUGFW does in Tobago, and why is it so relevant that you guys are having an internal election?
Good. So the NUGFW represents all daily paid workers in the Tobago space. Throughout all the divisions of the Tobago House of Assembly, if you are a daily paid worker, meaning that you're paid fortnightly, even in the private sector, and wherever you are, you may not be a worker, you may have a relative, a friend, a family member. You should encourage them to be part of the union, and by, of course, in this case, part of the Labor Warriors, in that this is the entity that wants to use innovative means of securing your benefits, your entitlements, as we, traverse through. And we are all confronted with the challenges of everyday living. And a trade union really wants to represent you and make you comfortable and give you an equitable pie of the national benefits of the profits of the nation. Trinidad and Tobago is an extremely wealthy nation, brothers and sisters. The challenge is the distribution or the redistribution of the wealth.
All right, all right. Quite political there, Mr. Ogiste. But as campaign manager and lead consultant, right? We hear a lot about trade unions, and we have a lot of misconceptions about trade unionism. Kindly use this opportunity to promote the Labor Warriors,
Yes.
and highlight some of the policies per se, some of the directions in terms of what you just mentioned, in terms of securing the piece of the pie and distributing it equitably for labor workers and the non-labor non-deliberated workers in Tobago.
Right. So you see, historically, the construct of trade unions and the Industrial Relations Act and the environment and the space can be somewhat a bit not peaceful. I didn't want to use the word adversarial, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. In that the trade union will engage the government or the employer in a means and the aim of securing the workers' welfare. The employer, the government, or whoever is the business proprietor will want to maximize his profit. But at the end of the day, we look for benefits, we look for balance. Not only balance, we seek matters we also enter into the domain of safety. At the end of the day, when your family member, when your provider goes out, you want that spouse, that parent, that colleague to return home safe.
Yes.
And so usually, sometimes the negotiation process gets a little bit heated. Historically, there will be...
And why is that?
You see, because it's humans in the space and engaging in conversation and negotiation representing each party's interests.
Right. And the parties in this case would more than likely be the Tobago House of Assembly. If we're talking about negotiations, yes? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it's just that the Tobago House of Assembly would be one where the majority of its members lies.
Right.
We also have WASA. WASA is a unit by itself.
Right.
But you see the origin of the NUGFW would have represented once upon a time government workers and the private sector. There was a merge in 1967, and from the two entities, the Federated Workers and the National Union of Government Workers, combining into one entity. So therefore, historically and currently, NUGFW will represent workers both in the private and government space.
All right, all right. So we're talking about labor, and we're talking about your internal elections. Can I ask, emanating from these elections, what are the areas of focus in terms of improving labor and labor rights in Tobago? Because I'm no expert, but it seems to be that a lot of our workers in Tobago aren't aware of their rights. Some of them may or may not be exploited. Some of them may not be aware of their processes. So, emanating from this election, what are some of the projected goals relative to improving labor on the island?
Excellent. One, the labor warriors represented by the shield and the two swords will engage meaningful negotiations with the employer. Negotiations does not necessarily need to be adversarial. Neither do we have to wait until a matter or a dispute has escalated to a level and it becomes a grievance. We can engage it even before it reaches the non-crisis stage, therefore having meaning dialogue. The labor warriors will also seek to engage and negotiate innovative means of housing. When we look at the manner in which government treats with negotiations, where usually a term is 3 years, and we have 2 and 3 terms of negotiations outstanding, no longer is it necessary or prudent that negotiations target just a rate increase on your salary or wage. In the past, there was an administration way back in the days of the NAR when workers would have received a tax credit based on their savings in the Unit Trust Corporation. So therefore, the labor warriors will engage government in innovative aspects of negotiating the the terms, conditions, and benefits for the worker. We can consider workers being part of companies that are owned by the government, also partnering the government in housing, tourism, in all these aspects that speaks to the welfare and the growth of an economy. So the labor warriors are not the enemy of the state. We are partners. Even we can partner the government in terms of development for our workers. And we are about to show that, listen, we can demonstrate our ability not by the arcade way of withholding labor, but innovative application of labor towards the development of our economy.
Yes,
If
yes.
the economy grows, the ability of the government to disperse a more decent percentage in terms of benefits and wage and salary negotiation, their
Yes.
capacity increases.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned earlier that increases and better working
Conditions,
environment
yes.
for your workers.
Yes.
Quite recently I heard that the Tobago House of Assembly would have increased remuneration and work employment situations for their workers in CPEP and URP.
Yes.
Perchance was the NUGFW instrumental in this? If not, can the Tobago labor market, private and the public, see negotiations trending towards a further increase and more benefits from for your members?
Now, we, the labor warriors, embrace any initiative by any of the employer that seeks to benefit the welfare and the wellness of the worker. It means, therefore, if an employer will independently consider increasing these benefits, that's the type of environment that is conducive to a healthy industrial relations climate. And we embrace this. And it means, therefore, that there is potential for excellent relationship between the employer and the employee representative being the union.
Amen.
And as I would have said, it is important that a union engages the employer and assists that employer by the skills of the employees or the worker to be more profitable.
Yes.
If you profit, we profit.
Yes.
And we will secure, we will also protect the domains of the employer, knowing that we expect a reciprocation.
Yes. All right. So as we wind up this interview, my last question to you is, why should your members vote for you? I mean, I know you have said quite a lot. I know you would have pitched a lot, but just give us your closing remarks as campaign manager and lead consultant for the labor warriors in UGFW.
In closing, I want to say to you, the labor warriors represent that entity within the NUGFW that will use innovative means to seek you, the interests and the welfare of you, the worker. So friends, families, even for those persons who may have been over the years a bit frustrated and would have left the union, you're no longer a member, this is a time for you to reconsider your membership. Together, we can achieve benefits and we can pursue a climate and a direction that benefits both the worker and the employer. Remember that the symbol for the labor warrior is the shield and the two swords. Be focused. Not all mutual funds are the same. Be focused. You're looking for the shield and the two swords. Come out Monday, the 28th of October. There will be polling stations throughout. We will list it in the media. Come out and vote for the labor warriors.
All right, guys, you heard it from nobody else but Mr. Lance Ogiste, campaign manager and lead consultant for the labor warriors, discussing campaigning in NUGFW. That's National Union for Government and Federated Workers. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for joining us and shedding some light on what you do and the internal ramblings of the NUGFW. Next, we have coming up to discuss Foot Care for Carnival, Miss Delicia Boris with Miss Natalie Nantes. Remember to share the live, share the live, share the live. We'll be right back.